Imagine for a moment that you are the most powerful ruler on earth. You sit upon the throne of the vast Persian Empire, a realm so immense it stretches from the mountains of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. Your wealth is immeasurable. Your armies number in the hundreds of thousands, and your authority is unquestioned. You are Darius III, heir to a dynasty that has dominated the known world for 2 centuries. And yet, from the rugged lands of the far-off West, from a kingdom your courtiers dismiss as rustic and uncultured, a young man barely 23 has dared to challenge you. His name is Alexander, son of Philip of Macedon, an ambitious prince whose courage borders on reckless arrogance. You do not fear him at first. His invasion seems like nothing more than a bold nuisance. But then reports arrive, one after another, describing victories so swift and devastating that they unsettle even the most loyal of your generals. Alexander defeats your satraps at the Granicus. He sweeps along the Ionian coast, welcomed by Greek cities who had long chafed under Persian rule. He cuts the legendary Gordian knot, and with it announces to the world that he believes destiny itself bows to his will. The boy becomes a threat, and the threat becomes a danger. Soon, you realize that this young king does not come to raid your provinces. He comes to conquer your empire. And so, you assemble the greatest army the world has seen. Warriors, archers, cavalry, noble horsemen, Greek mercenaries, tens of thousands answering the call of the King of Kings. The very sight of your forces is enough to crush the spirit of lesser men. Confident and commanding, you march to meet your enemy, ready to extinguish his ambitions once and for all. Yet the world of war is governed not only by strength, but by chance, timing, and the fatal flaws of human judgment. As your colossal army moves across the rugged mountains of northern Syria, something extraordinary happens. At the very same time, Alexander, weakened after battling a near-fatal fever, presses southward through the narrow Syrian gates, searching desperately for you. Both armies, each hunting the other, pass unseen on opposite sides of the mountains. 2 titans of the ancient world, each fully aware the other is near, manage to slip past one another like shadows in a storm. It is you who realizes the truth first. You have emerged behind the Macedonian army. In one stroke, you have severed Alexander's supply lines and blocked his only road of retreat. He is now trapped, an invader stranded deep inside your empire, without provisions, without reinforcements, without hope of escape. The moment feels like a gift from the gods themselves. You descend upon the coastal town of Issus, seize Alexander's hospital base, and order the execution of the wounded Macedonians left behind. You want to send a message of terror to let this reckless boy king know what awaits him. Your confidence surges. Your courtiers whisper that the Macedonians are terrified, perhaps even preparing to flee. You believe the victory is certain. After all, how could Alexander, isolated and outnumbered, possibly stand against the full might of Persia? The trap is perfect. The invader is cornered. The outcome seems assured. But destiny has a peculiar way of turning certainty into illusion. While your army settles into position near Issus, Alexander receives the shocking news. You are no longer ahead of him. You are behind him. Your massive army stands between him and his homeland. Panic spreads through the Macedonian camp. Even Alexander's most seasoned generals pale at the prospect of fighting under such hopeless conditions. Some whisper of retreat. Others dare to utter the unthinkable: negotiation. Then Alexander himself arrives, and his reaction is unlike anything his men expect. Instead of despair, he bursts into triumphant laughter. Instead of fear, he radiates joy. He tells his commanders that what they perceive as disaster is in truth a divine gift. You, the King of Kings, in your haste and arrogance, have made a monumental mistake. Instead of waiting on the open plains, where your vast army could engulf the Macedonians in sheer numbers, you have cornered yourself in a narrow strip of land between mountains and sea. In this cramped battlefield, you cannot deploy your full strength. Your cavalry cannot sweep around the flanks. Your numbers count for little. Alexander announces that the gods have delivered you into his hands. His certainty is absolute, and something in his voice rekindles the fire inside his soldiers. Fear dissolves, replaced by fierce pride. If Alexander believes victory awaits them, then so do they. With renewed determination, they turn north toward Issus. Alexander, riding at the front beneath the night sky, knows that the coming battle will decide far more than territory. It will determine whether he is merely a bold young king or the man destined to reshape the world. That night, as the Macedonians march, the Mediterranean wind sweeps across the narrow coastal plain. In the darkness ahead lies your army, luminous with torchlight, stretching like a vast living wall across the banks of the Pinarus River. You wait with confidence, certain that the dawn will bring Alexander's destruction. But dawn will bring something else entirely. It will mark the beginning of one of history's most astonishing reversals of fortune, a moment when a trapped young king turns certain defeat into immortal victory. As dawn approached over the narrow plain of Issus, the sea shimmered on one side, while the dark silhouette of the Achaemenid mountains loomed on the other. Between them stretched a cramped ribbon of land, barely wide enough to contain the colossal Persian host that awaited Alexander's arrival. The Pinarus River cut diagonally across this already confined space, its cold waters winding like a natural barrier before the Persian battle line. For any commander, this terrain would be challenging. For an army as vast as yours, it was a nightmare disguised as opportunity. Yet you, Darius, had already committed yourself. Your chariots, your cavalry, your infantry, all were anchored to this single strip of ground. You had set the stage, believing it to be a trap only your enemy could fall into. When Alexander's scouts finally caught sight of your torches flickering along the riverbank, the Macedonian king quickened his pace. His men, hardened by months of marching and war, advanced with silent determination. Alexander rode ahead, examining the field with a mind that absorbed every detail: the river, the slope of the banks, the density of your troops, and the way the morning wind carried the distant sounds of your commands. He understood instantly what many generals would have missed. The terrain had already betrayed you. You were too large for this battlefield. Your strength was your weakness. While your infantry lined the river, you placed your strongest Greek mercenaries in the center, the one part of your army capable of facing the Macedonian phalanx head-on. Thousands of elite cavalry clustered on your right, near the sea, ready to crush Alexander's left. On your left wing, where the land climbed sharply toward the foothills, tens of thousands of lighter infantry stood in packed formation. And in the heart of your army, glimmering beneath the rising sun, you stood tall upon your royal chariot, guarded by the immortals. The message was clear. You were here not only to win, but to witness Alexander's ruin with your own eyes. Across the field, Alexander made his own preparations. He placed Parmenion on the left, assigning him the thankless task of holding back your superior cavalry. The phalanx he positioned at the center, the steel spine of his army. but it was his right wing that held his true intention. There, among the foothills, he massed his finest troops, agile skirmishers, elite shield-bearers, and the unstoppable companion cavalry, which he would lead personally. He knew that the battle would not be won by brute force. It would be won by timing, precision, and the exploitation of one fatal mistake. With every unit in place, Alexander rode before his men, calling out to them by name, reminding them not of the danger, but of the glory waiting beyond the river. The Macedonians responded with thunderous cheers. They were outnumbered, far from home, and facing an enemy many times their size, but they believed in him. With that belief, they awaited his signal. The battle began not with a headlong charge, but with a maneuver so subtle and brilliant that it immediately unbalanced your left wing. Alexander led his right flank forward at an angle, drifting toward the mountains as if he intended to skirt around your forces and attack from behind. To your commanders on that side, the movement looked ominous. They feared that if they allowed Alexander to keep advancing diagonally, he might outflank the entire Persian line. And so, without your order, or perhaps in blind panic, they surged downhill to intercept him. In that moment, the tight, orderly formation you had established began to unravel. The soldiers who had held their ground above the river now spilled down the slope, disrupting their own ranks and creating a widening gap between themselves and your central mercenary phalanx. Alexander had expected exactly this. In an instant, he shifted from deception to destruction. He signaled his cavalry to wheel into their deadly wedge formation, a spear point of iron and flesh. With a shout that echoed across the battlefield, he led the companions straight into the exposed flank your left wing had carelessly abandoned. Horses crashed forward, hooves slamming into mud and stone, lances leveled like lightning. The impact shattered your infantry's cohesion within seconds. Thousands who had expected a simple defensive stand now found themselves crushed by the most disciplined cavalry the ancient world had ever seen. Yet even as Alexander carved through your left, the real struggle exploded in the center. His phalanx attempted to cross the Pinarus, but the river was deeper and more treacherous than it looked. The water dragged at their cloaks, mud sucked at their sandals, and for a moment their impossibly long sarissas became liabilities rather than weapons. As they scrambled up the opposite bank, soaked and disordered, your Greek mercenaries struck. Shield collided with shield, spears clanged against breastplates. Men screamed as they fell into the river or were trampled by those behind them. There, in the heart of the battlefield, your hired Greeks fought with professional fury. They knew the tactics of the Macedonian phalanx. They had fought Macedonians before. They pushed hard, driving the disorganized phalanx backward, threatening to open deadly gaps in Alexander's line. In those brutal minutes, the Macedonian center came dangerously close to breaking. The fate of the invasion, perhaps the fate of Alexander himself, hung in the balance. But while lesser generals might have lost themselves in the exhilaration of their own successes, Alexander did something extraordinary. From the edge of his breakthrough on the right, he looked back and saw the crisis unfolding. He recognized in an instant that victory on the flank meant nothing if the center collapsed. Instead of pressing deeper into your routed left, instead of claiming easy glory, he pulled his cavalry back. The discipline required to restrain victorious horsemen is immense, but Alexander commanded it with a single gesture. He turned the companions toward the center, then he charged again. This second charge struck your Greek mercenaries like a hammer falling from the heavens. Already locked in a grinding struggle against the phalanx pressing forward from the river, they now found a wall of cavalry crashing into their exposed side. Their discipline faltered, their formation buckled, and suddenly, what had moments earlier looked like a possible Persian victory dissolved into chaos. As your center began to collapse, Alexander saw you. There you stood in your royal chariot, the symbol of Persia's divine authority, directly in his line of sight. His bloodied horse dug into the earth, eager beneath him. His men rallied around him with shouts of triumph, and with the battlefield turning in his favor, Alexander gathered his cavalry in a final irresistible surge aimed straight at the heart of your empire, at you. In that instant, a cold wave of fear broke over you. You saw the Macedonian king, the man whose name had spread like wildfire across your provinces, charging toward you with a determination that seemed almost supernatural. The ground trembled beneath the hooves of his cavalry. Dust swirled around him like a storm. And you understood. Alexander was coming not for your army. He was coming for you. You turned your chariot. You fled. It was one command, one moment, one decision, but it was enough to destroy everything. From the center, the panic rippled outward, racing across your lines. Soldiers saw the royal standard disappearing into the distance and felt their courage vanish with it. After all, if the King of Kings had abandoned the battlefield, what loyalty could they owe to a lost cause? Your cavalry on the right, once eager to crush Parmenion, now hesitated, faltered, and finally broke. The entire Persian host dissolved into a tidal wave of fear and retreat. And there, on the narrow plain of Issus, with the sea hemming them on one side and jagged mountains blocking the other, tens of thousands of your soldiers were cut down or trampled in their desperate attempt to escape. The trap you believed you had set became a prison for your own army. Your casualties numbered in the tens of thousands. The Macedonians lost only a fraction of that. Night fell upon a battlefield littered with the ruins of the Persian dream. But worse than the loss of men, worse than the treasure you left behind in your hurried flight, was something more devastating. You abandoned your own family. Your mother, your wife, your daughters, all left behind in the royal pavilion, bewildered, terrified, believing you dead or worse. Alexander entered the luxurious tent you had fled from. The gold, the purple silks, the jeweled ornaments, all spoke of your unmatched wealth. And in the center sat the women of your household, trembling as they awaited their fate. They expected cruelty, humiliation, or execution. Instead, Alexander offered honor. In a gesture that astonished all who witnessed it, he reassured them that no harm would come to them, that you were alive, and that they would be treated not as prisoners, but as royalty. When your mother mistakenly bowed to Hephaestion, thinking he was the king, Alexander gently lifted her up and said, "Mother, do not fear. He too is Alexander." It was kindness, but also strategy. A message to the empire that the Macedonian conqueror was not merely a destroyer, but a ruler in waiting. Word of the battle and your flight spread across the empire like wildfire. Satraps whispered. Generals doubted. The divine aura that had surrounded your throne cracked. In Issus, the facade of Persian invincibility collapsed, and in its place rose the legend of Alexander, brilliant, fearless, unstoppable. From this moment on, the path to the heart of the Persian Empire lay wide open. In the days that followed the Battle of Issus, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. News of your defeat, Darius, traveled faster than any messenger could ride. It sped along the royal road, whispered from caravan to caravan, carried across marketplaces and palace courts. The King of Kings had fled, and a foreign boy had shattered the army of Persia. Across the empire, disbelief quickly turned to dread. For centuries, Persia had been the unshakable colossus of the East. Now that illusion had been broken, not by slow erosion but by a single decisive stroke. Alexander remained for several days at Issus, tending to the wounded, reorganizing his forces, and absorbing the reality of what he had won. Treasure beyond imagining lay scattered through your abandoned camp. Gold, silver, fine fabrics, jewelry, royal furnishings, and enough wealth to finance entire armies. Until this moment, his campaign had always balanced on a razor's edge of tight resources and long distances. Now he was, almost overnight, one of the richest men alive. Yet for all the glitter of gold, what affected him most was not the treasure but the presence of your family, their dignity, their grief, their quiet fear, and their unexpected trust in him added a solemn weight to his victory. Alexander had broken your army, but in caring for your family, he had also claimed something deeper, the moral authority you had abandoned. But even as he rested, Alexander's mind remained on the future. He understood, as few commanders ever have, that victory means nothing if not pursued. A defeated enemy who is allowed to retreat is an enemy who will rise again. And so, as your army scattered across the plains of Syria, Alexander prepared to follow the path that would lead him deeper into your empire. He knew you were not finished. He knew you would rebuild. And he intended to meet you again, on ground of his choosing, for a final reckoning. Yet before he could pursue you eastward, he faced a strategic obstacle that had nothing to do with battlefields. His supply lines stretched across the eastern Mediterranean, vulnerable to the Persian navy. If he marched straight into Mesopotamia, your fleets could circle behind him, cut off his access to Greece, isolate his army, and force him into a desperate retreat. For all his brilliance on land, Alexander understood the sea could undo him if he ignored it. Thus, even with you fleeing toward Babylon, he made a choice that revealed his strategic genius. He would not chase you. Not yet. Instead, he would break your power piece by piece, beginning with the Phoenician coast. The cities along that coast, Byblos, Sidon, Tyre, were not just wealthy ports. They were the backbone of Persian naval operations. Their fleets supplied your navy. Their harbors sheltered your ships. Without them, your presence in the Mediterranean would collapse. And so Alexander marched south, not in haste, but with deliberate purpose, sweeping through Syria like a storm. The response of the Phoenician cities could not have been more telling. Many opened their gates at the mere sight of him. Some sent envoys bearing gifts, proclaiming loyalty. Sidon, once fiercely loyal to Persia, welcomed him as a liberator. Its people, long resentful of Persian rule, saw in Alexander not a conqueror, but a chance to choose their own future. In each city that surrendered peacefully, he showed magnanimity, confirming local leaders, respecting traditions, and proclaiming that he had come not to enslave, but to rule justly. Through mercy, he won allies. Through discipline, he won trust. Only one city dared to defy him. Tyre, the island fortress, jewel of Phoenicia, proud and unconquered for centuries. Its walls rose from the sea itself, and its people believed, perhaps rightly, that no army could reach them. They offered Alexander friendship, but denied him entry. They believed he would tire, that he would move on, leaving them untouched. But they had misjudged the man entirely. Alexander did not accept half measures. He did not tolerate defiance, and above all, he did not allow strategic threats to linger. The siege of Tyre would become one of the most extraordinary feats of engineering and determination in the ancient world. But that was still ahead. For now, Alexander advanced to the great city of Damascus, where another fortune awaited him. The Persian officials who fled from you after Issus had taken with them enormous wealth: gold, silver, supplies, camels, royal tapestries, believing they could escape into the interior. But your panic had infected them as well. They abandoned their treasure in confusion, and Alexander captured it all. Every chest of coins, every sack of valuables, every luxury intended for the Persian court fell into his hands. It was a second victory, almost equal in value to Issus itself. The Macedonian soldiers began to feel something they had never fully tasted before: security. The campaign no longer felt like a desperate gamble in a foreign land. They were now the favored sons of fortune, marching behind a commander who seemed incapable of failure. Their faith in Alexander transformed from loyalty into fervor. They believed the gods walked beside him. They believed he could do anything. Meanwhile, across the empire, the perception of you, Darius, was shifting in dangerous ways. Before Issus, you had been a living symbol of divine kingship. Your subjects believed your authority came from Ahura Mazda himself. But after your flight, that aura evaporated. Powerful satraps wondered if the gods had withdrawn their favor. Ambitious generals began calculating their future. Whispers rose in Babylon, in Susa, even in faraway Bactria, questioning not only your judgment, but your right to rule. In a system built entirely on the king's personal authority, doubt was more poisonous than defeat. And yet, you were not finished. Though your honor had been wounded and your confidence shaken, you still commanded the resources of a vast empire. You sent letters to Alexander, offering ransom for your family, offering peace, offering alliance if only he would turn back. You believed diplomacy might buy you time, but Alexander, perhaps emboldened by victory, perhaps guided by deeper ambition, refused everything. He told your envoys that he did not seek friendship or ransom. He sought you, and he intended to rule not part of your empire, but all of it. Your second letter was more desperate, more generous, offering territory and riches beyond imagination. Alexander read it, smiled, and rejected it once again. His generals urged caution, but he silenced them with a single unforgettable line: "The earth cannot hold two suns, nor can Asia hold two kings." While he marched southward, your empire trembled under the weight of approaching doom. Those who had once sworn loyalty to you now swore loyalty to him. Those who had once feared your armies now feared his relentless advance. One victory had shifted the balance of an entire world. And so the stage was set for the next great chapter, a siege that would test Alexander's will more than any battle before it, and a gathering storm in the east as you prepared a second, even greater army. The defeat at Issus had not ended the conflict. It had only begun a chain of events that would lead both of you toward a final confrontation that would shake the foundations of the ancient world. As Alexander moved slowly but relentlessly down the Phoenician coast, the world began to sense that a transformation was underway. The young king who had once crossed the Hellespont with a modest army now commanded the loyalty of entire cities, the wealth of nations, and the awe of both friends and enemies. Yet he had no intention of slowing his pace. Ahead of him stood the greatest naval power of the eastern Mediterranean, a glittering island city whose pride matched its strength. Tyre, ancient, defiant, and untouched by conquerors for generations, now found itself face to face with a man who refused to accept the word impossible. When the envoys of Tyre approached Alexander, they came not with submission, but with courtesy. They offered friendship, trade, and alliance, but they denied him entry to their island sanctuary. Tyre believed it held the one advantage no king could overcome: the sea itself. Its massive walls rose straight out of deep water. Its people were masters of shipbuilding. Its fleets were swift, its harbors secure. They had defied empires before and survived. Surely this Macedonian youth, brilliant though he was, would move on rather than waste months battering himself against an island that could not be reached. But Alexander had already measured them, not just their stone walls, but the pride that built them. He understood that leaving Tyre unconquered would mean leaving Persia's last naval lifeline intact. And so, with the same calm confidence he displayed at Issus, he made a decision that astonished both friend and foe. If the sea separated him from Tyre, he would simply erase the sea. He ordered his engineers to build a causeway, a massive land bridge, stretching from the mainland to the island nearly a kilometer offshore. It was a feat so audacious, so improbable, that even his own officers doubted he could complete it. But Alexander's army did not disobey him. They gathered stones, timber, debris, and earth from the coastline. They drove wooden pilings into the seabed and began pushing the shoreline outward, meter by meter, day after day. Tyre watched in disbelief as solid ground crept toward them. They launched raids from the sea, burning Macedonian towers and sinking machines. They mocked Alexander from their walls, shouting that he fought against Poseidon himself. But the Macedonian king only redoubled his efforts. He summoned fleets from the conquered Phoenician cities, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad, and they came not reluctantly, but eagerly. Former Persian ships now sailed under Macedonian colors, closing the ring around Tyre. The sea, once the city's shield, became its prison. The siege lasted 7 weary months, filled with setbacks, storms, and desperate assaults. But Alexander did not waver. He built siege towers taller than any the world had seen. He ordered catapults positioned on ships. Slowly, visibly, inexorably, the wall of Tyre began to crack. And when the moment of collapse finally came, when Macedonian soldiers poured through the breach and Tyre realized that even the sea could not protect it, the world understood something new about Alexander. He was not simply a general. He was a force of will, a man who could reshape nature itself to achieve his goals. The fall of Tyre stunned the ancient world. Persia's greatest naval bastion had crumbled. The last anchor of your power in the Mediterranean had vanished. And Alexander marched on, his legend swelling like a rising tide. From Tyre he moved south toward Egypt, where centuries of resentment toward Persian rule opened the gates before him without resistance. The Egyptians, weary of foreign overlords, greeted him as a liberator. In Memphis, priests placed the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt upon his head, declaring him pharaoh, a title that bound him to a legacy stretching back millennia. For the first time in his campaign, Alexander felt not only the thrill of conquest, but the weight of eternity. He traveled to the mouth of the Nile and chose a site for a new city. There, between the river and the sea, he traced in the sand the outline of Alexandria, a city that would one day become a beacon of knowledge, culture, and power long after empires had risen and fallen. In doing so, he did more than conquer. He created. Yet the moment that would define his time in Egypt lay not in its cities, but in the desolate immensity of the Libyan desert. Against the advice of his generals, Alexander journeyed to the oracle of Siwa, a lonely sanctuary hidden amid endless dunes. There the priests greeted him with words no mortal could ignore. What they told him remains shrouded in mystery. Some say they addressed him as son of Zeus Ammon, others that they confirmed a destiny no human hand could halt. Whatever truth the oracle spoke, it marked Alexander forever. He emerged from the desert not just as a king, but as a man convinced that fate itself marched beside him. While Alexander basked in triumph and divine affirmation, you, Darius, were far to the east gathering your strength. The defeat at Issus had wounded your pride, but not your power. You summoned troops from every corner of the empire. Bactrian horsemen, Scythian archers, Babylonian levies, Indian contingents armed with chariots and elephants. You built an army so vast that its numbers defied belief. You reinforced discipline, tightened command, and swore never again to yield the field to your enemy. The letters you sent to Alexander asking for peace were no longer messages of hope. They were attempts to buy time. But Alexander rejected them all. When word reached him that you were raising a new army in the heart of Mesopotamia, he felt the familiar thrill of destiny. Egypt was secure. The Phoenician coast was his. The Persian navy was broken. And now, at last, the moment he had been preparing for since Issus had come. He would march east, not as an invader risking everything, but as a conqueror advancing toward the final challenge. Your armies gathered on the plains near Gaugamela. Your engineers leveled the ground for your scythed chariots. Your generals assured you this time would be different. But deep in your heart, you must have felt a shadow of doubt, the memory of that young king charging toward your chariot at Issus. As Alexander turned his army away from the Nile and began his long march toward you, across Syria, across the Euphrates, toward the Tigris and the great plains beyond, both of you knew that history had been building toward a single collision. Issus had been a shock, a fracture, a moment when the old world cracked. But Gaugamela would be something else entirely. It would be the test that would decide the fate of an empire and the shape of the ancient world. The wheels of destiny had begun turning, and neither of you could escape what lay ahead.